This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter than outrage and far more dangerous. Somewhere inside the machinery of government, a switch has been flipped. Not loudly, not illegally on its face, just slowly enough that most people don't notice. Deadlines pass. Reports don't arrive. Documents exist, but remain unseen. Millions of them. Nothing explodes. Nothing collapses. The system keeps moving, which is the point, because when accountability depends on time, and time is controlled by the people being scrutinized, truth doesn't have to be denied. It just has to be delayed. If you've been waiting for a revelation, this may feel frustrating. Stay with me, because what's happening here isn't about what's hidden. It's about how hiding became procedural. And once that becomes normal, the consequences don't stay contained. They never do. Here's the mistake we're trained to make. We look for the villain, the face, the name. But systems don't collapse because of personalities. They collapse because control quietly migrates. Right now, power does not sit where we think it does. It doesn't live in speeches or votes or even decisions. It lives in process. Who controls the clock? Who defines what is under review? Who decides when compliance is considered effort instead of outcome? On paper, the rules still exist. Deadlines are written down. Oversight is promised. Transparency is guaranteed. But when the same institution responsible for disclosure is also responsible for delay, accountability becomes optional without ever being refused. Nothing has to be destroyed. No law has to be overturned. The system simply learns how to wait. And waiting feels reasonable at first, because patience sounds like stability, until you realize patience is being demanded only from the public. That's when the shift begins. And it never announces itself. There was a time when delay meant failure, when missing a deadline triggered consequences, when oversight arrived with urgency, not excuses. That time didn't end suddenly. It faded. What changed wasn't the law. It was our tolerance, still under review, logistical challenges, extraordinary volume. These phrases didn't raise alarms. They sounded responsible, careful, professional, before transparency confirmed trust. Now, trust is used to justify opacity before delay demanded explanation. Now, explanation is the delay. And the longer this pattern repeats, the less shocking it feels. That's the danger of slow shifts. They don't look like corruption. They look like process. Each missed deadline lowers the temperature. Each partial release resets expectations downward until the public adjusts to knowing less without being told they're losing anything. This isn't secrecy by force. It's secrecy by normalization. And once a system learns it can survive without answering, it begins to test how much silence it can sustain. The next moment will feel sudden, but it won't be. Then comes the moment that should have snapped everything back into focus. A deadline arrives. It passes. Nothing happens. Not a correction, not a full release, not even the required explanation for why compliance failed. Instead, a fraction appears. A sliver presented as progress. Thousands of documents released into a vacuum where millions are known to exist. The math doesn't work. And it doesn't try to. We're told the volume is overwhelming. That review takes time. That the work is ongoing. Hundreds of lawyers, agents assigned, entire offices redirected, and still silence. If this were a one-off failure, it might be forgettable. If it were a technical glitch, it might be forgivable. But this wasn't chaos. It was order because the system didn't break. It performed exactly as designed, producing just enough movement to avoid consequence and just enough opacity to prevent verification. If you're still watching, pause for 1 second. Ask yourself who benefits from this pace, because what looks like delay is already doing its job. And the most important question hasn't been asked yet. Here's how the mechanism actually works. Transparency, in theory, is simple. You produce what the law requires. You redact only what must be protected. You explain the rest. But in practice, transparency is filtered through workflow. And workflow is where power hides. Every document enters a queue. Every queue has a pace. Every pace can be justified. Review becomes a shield. Redaction becomes discretion. Discretion becomes control. Nothing is erased. Nothing is denied. Everything is pending. And while it's pending, consequences evaporate. The people demanding answers are forced into patience. The people holding the information absorb no cost for delay. Time moves in only one direction. This is where damage is redistributed. The public carries uncertainty. Oversight carries frustration. Survivors carry silence. Meanwhile, institutions learn a valuable lesson. Compliance isn't about completion. It's about appearing cooperative long enough for attention to move on. This isn't a cover-up in the old sense. It's something cleaner, more durable. And once a system proves it can do this without penalty, it doesn't stop. It scales. Now the pace changes. Deadlines stack. Explanations repeat. Nothing resolves. More documents acknowledged, millions still unseen. The gap widens. Requests escalate. Oversight tightens. And suddenly, trust is gone. When patience runs out, systems don't speed up. They harden. Independent review is suggested. Monitoring is proposed because the process can no longer police itself. That alone tells you something broke. When the referee needs a referee, the game is already compromised. This isn't a rebellion. It's procedural fatigue turning into confrontation. The system resists without saying no. It absorbs pressure without yielding ground. And here's the risk. Every day this drags on, delay stops looking like failure and starts looking like precedent. If this works once, it becomes a template. And templates don't stay contained. They get reused. This is where it reaches you, not abstractly, not politically, personally. Because when accountability slows down, the cost doesn't disappear. It shifts. You wait longer for answers you were told you'd receive. You watch institutions explain process instead of outcomes. You're asked to be reasonable, again, and over time, something subtle happens. Expectation lowers. You stop anticipating clarity. You stop believing timelines. You stop assuming disclosure actually means disclosure. That's not apathy. That's conditioning. If you're feeling a quiet fatigue about all of this, that's not accidental. Fatigue is part of the system now. This is the point where many people tune out. Don't, because when disengagement feels rational, the mechanism has already succeeded. Stay here. Notice what's being normalized. Because once a public learns to expect delay instead of truth, reversing that expectation becomes almost impossible. And what comes next doesn't ask for your patience. This is no longer confined to one case, or one institution, or even one country, because systems watch each other. When delay works here, it signals elsewhere. That transparency can be managed. That compliance can be negotiated. That law can be stretched without snapping. Across borders, oversight regimes rely on the same assumptions, that deadlines matter, that disclosure means release, that delay carries cost. But once a powerful system demonstrates that time can be controlled, others adapt. Cooperation slows. Information sharing thins. Trust between institutions degrades quietly. Nothing dramatic happens. No announcement is made. Just fewer answers. Later. With more conditions, what used to be exceptional starts to look normal. And when normalization spreads, the problem stops being legal. It becomes structural. At that point, fixing it isn't about enforcement. It's about rebuilding expectations that have already been trained away, which brings us to the most dangerous phase, the future. So now we're standing at a fork, not a prediction, a trajectory. There are three ways this goes. The first is adjustment. Rules tighten. Timelines harden. Independent oversight becomes routine, not reactive. The system absorbs the shock and corrects. It's slower than anyone wants, but accountability regains weight. The second is erosion. Delay becomes standard practice. Deadlines turn symbolic. Transparency exists mostly on paper. Nothing collapses, but nothing fully works the way it's supposed to. Trust thins. Cynicism replaces expectation. And then there's rupture. That's when delay stops being tolerated. When patience flips into suspicion, when institutions lose legitimacy faster than they can explain themselves. Not because of one secret, but because of too many unanswered questions piled too high. Which path we're on isn't clear yet. That's the point, because systems rarely announce the moment they tip. You only realize it later when going back is no longer an option. And we're not past that moment. Not yet. There's a temptation at this point to look for closure, for reassurance, for someone to step in and restore order. That's not how this ends, because the most dangerous systems don't fail loudly. They don't collapse under pressure. They adapt. They learn how much silence they can carry, how long delay can replace answers, how often patience can be requested before it turns into habit. Nothing here requires bad faith to continue, only precedent. And precedent is already being written. If you're waiting for the moment when everything becomes undeniable, you may miss it. Those moments tend to look ordinary when they arrive. So stay alert, not outraged, not comforted, alert. Because this isn't about what one administration does, it's about what future ones are allowed to inherit. If you want to understand where this goes next, you have to keep watching the process, not the headlines. This story doesn't resolve here. It deepens. And the next chapter won't ask for your attention. It will assume it's already gone. Stay with it.